Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and Leap, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is strategizing your testing and admissions timeline. But first, let's meet our special guest, Eric Greenberg.
Eric Greenberg is a leading educational services expert. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton Business School and is a graduate of the Fieldsons High School in Riverdale, New York. Since establishing Greenberg Educational Group in New York City in 1991, Eric and his team have helped thousands of students achieve their academic goals through strategic educational advising and application essay assistance, test preparation services, and subject-specific academic tutoring. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Eric, we are very happy to have someone with such an extensive history in test prep, also someone who knows well my hometown, Riverdale, New York.
Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir. By the way, I've taken the number one train up there many times. So
there we go. That's it. I mean, it's too bad that the number one train is just not that convenient to Riverdale. But what are we going to do? Before we dive into a topic that all three of us have a lot to share about, we'd love to have you share your history in education and, how you arrived where you are today.
Sure. The impetus for my founding Greenberg Educational Group was actually from the college advisor that I had at Fieldston. And he took a very, very personal approach. He listened to us. He listened closely to us. We got to ask questions and so forth. And the college advising at Fieldston was very, very hands-on. So I didn't know when I graduated high school that ultimately I would circle back to that. But as time went on, I realized how meaningful it was, and I decided it would be a great thing to try.
And what was your path? You didn't go right into education, did you?
Well, no. What I did was I went to the Wharton Business School, and I didn't study much education there, but during college, I did do a lot of tutoring, and I did in high school as well. So I've been around it for a long time. And I realized in college that this was my calling. A lot of my friends went the business investment banking route, but I went this entrepreneurial route. And quite frankly, years later, I'm happy I did.
Yeah, Amy and I talk to so many educators in our space, and that's how many of us feel like we got lucky falling into it.
I always use the word serendipity. My first job, my boss always talked about serendipity of how he got into his field. And I still look back now, I'm like, yeah, my serendipity was working for Prince Review back in the day. So we all sort of hooked up with it and fell in love with it. And we're all how many years later, Eric, for you?
Well, about 35 years later.
I think combined, right, we have over a century of mostly happy experience.
Right.
I'm only adding a few years to that, not like you guys.
I was going to say, Mike, just emphasize the word combined, right?
I
just want to make that caveat.
People can do as much math as they would like to do, but it is interesting. Like, for example, you getting into it in 1991. Mike and I weren't that far behind, 94 at the same sort of time, except different ways. I was coming through Prince Review. Mike was coming through Kaplan. So it's kind of a funny.
Right. So do you know John Katzman?
I never met John Katzman. Yeah. I was in Cleveland. So see, I didn't get to be in the sort of New York test prep world back then. So yeah.
Got it.
Now, I was in the New York Metro with Kaplan, which meant that I met all the people who ran corporate.
And in many ways, early in those stages, I felt that people in our industry were basically pariahs. We had to justify to people literally why one-on-one advising, test prep, et cetera, is worthwhile. Now it's obviously changed. The whole landscape has changed. But back then, we really had to sell it in certain ways. So it's a little bit different now.
I don't think it's changed as much. It might have changed in the parts of New York City where you speak to families, but very often we still find ourselves trying to explain very basically the benefits of college advising or test preparation or even tutoring, and why working with an experienced professional is better than asking ChatGPT to tell you the answers.
Correct.
And I think that's the thing. Our industry has come a long way in terms of legitimization. And obviously at this point, necessity, right? Because we all know and can attest to the fact that we're seeing many students these days that don't have the sort of requisite skills that they need for taking these tests. So, well, so let's lead into kind of like the importance of testing. But I'm curious, Eric, from your experience, why do you think it's important for students and parents to really assess their testing plans by the end of 10th grade? I think some families don't really know what kind of timeline there should be. So tell us about what's important here.
Right. I would even suggest that it could be earlier than the end of 10th grade, maybe the beginning of 10th grade. The reality is, with this whole new reality of college admissions, where a lot of people are applying early decision, which ultimately makes high school feel a lot shorter, 3 years instead of four, everything is pushed earlier organically. So if somebody 10, 20 years ago started the process, say in 11th grade, that's kind of equivalent to 10th grade now. And one of the reasons why that's important is because, as we all know, many, many colleges are looking at SAT and ACT with the same figure that they did pre-COVID at this point. So that's something that has to be taken into account.
And what's interesting
And
too is students today, many students are more advanced in their math curriculum than when we went to high school. And so, how do you think that might contribute? If you've got a student, let's say, who's taking calc or AP calc or whatever by junior year, I'm curious what kind of recommendations do you make based upon just the math classes
Sure.
the students
Great,
take?
great question. It's a good idea to front load it regardless, because the reality is 11th grade is much busier than 10th grade. So the idea is as soon as you can get it done in 11th grade, that's advantageous. So we recommend to our clients that they aim to try to get ACT done by the end of the fall semester of 11th grade, due to the fact that a lot of students have APs and are going to have many time commitments. And you don't want a student to compete against themselves, right? You want people to try to excel in as many different buckets as possible. So from that point of view, earlier, now your point is very well taken, Amy, that a lot of people might be a little bit more advanced than the math on the SAT or ACT. That does happen, but the reality is with the test prep that we do and the experience that all of us have, we're able to mitigate that and really circle back to what's needed for the test. And the flip side to that is by starting earlier, there are going to be some people who haven't seen certain components of the test. So we would fill those gaps as well. So either way, we kind of have it covered on both ends.
yeah, I think you're both hitting on something that's so fundamental to the discussion of testing timelines that it deserves to be repeated again and again because many adults still have in their minds a paradigm where you take your first SAT or ACT at the end of junior year and the beginning of senior year. And that may work for a student who is not involved in any honors, APs, or IB programs. They're not aggressively scheduled for the spring, and maybe they're on the regular track for math, which means you need a lot of Algebra 2 under your belt
Right.
to have a chance at your best score on the SAT or ACT, especially the SAT. But so many students now are accelerated math, are taking one, two, three, four APs. They're involved in aggressive activities in the spring. Lots of spring athletes who are being recruited and need scores. They're going on college visits during spring break, or if you're in the Northeast, also a winter break, and they're going to be away. There's prom. There's so many reasons why the spring is, at least in my view, the worst time to take the SAT or ACT. And if you default to that idea that you don't make a decision until your PSAT, you've missed the most optimal opportunities for many students to take the test and ideally be done by, as you say, right? Like by December of junior year, many students could credibly be finished.
Number one, a lot of schools, as you know, offer PPSAT in 10th grade. A lot still do it in 11th grade. And the reality, by taking the PSAT and using that as a determining factor, number one, might preclude the possibility of taking the ACT, because if they take the PSAT in 11th grade, they might not have time to pivot as such. So the idea is, before going into the PSAT, whether it's a 10th grade or 11th grade, it's really very prudent in many ways to take practice tests in each to determine which test is better for a particular student. And the colleges, as you know, don't care, which one a student takes. It's strictly score driven.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's really nice to take a look at that data that you have by the end of sophomore year and look at that summer. Are you going to take advantage of that summer between sophomore and junior year? Especially like if you're really strong and you want to contend for national merit. But at the same time, you have to factor in life. Like I think, Mike, you mentioned earlier, some students are going to be involved in activities that are going to sort of take them out of the quote unquote test prep game, in which case you have to account for that. Like, for example, I love it when you find out it's an athlete in a fall sport. So, like senior year fall gone,
Right,
so you have
right.
to work around that. But at the same time, I think something that's kind of different is more and more schools have moved to the model of super scoring at SAT or ACT, which means you don't lose anything by getting in the game early because you can start to acquire your best individual or sub scores and contribute that to what is your overall best score, which means getting in that game of testing is not a bad idea early.
I agree. And also now with the optionality of the science section on the ACT, that also adds to it. I think another reason why it's great to think about the testing way in advance is because families tend to plan their summers way in advance.
Hmm.
And many of our students now are preparing for SAT, ACT over the summer as a rising junior, whereas 10, 20 years ago, that was such a hard sell, we wouldn't even broach it. But now, for the reasons that we discussed before, it tends to be very prudent to do so. So it's really a new reality in everything that we do in this field.
Yeah, and I bet you would agree that the summer is for many students the absolute best time to be preparing for these exams.
They might not think so, but
Right.
But we
objectively,
know
right,
differently.
right, we know differently. But objectively, I think the big picture item is during the summer they're not competing against themselves.
Yeah.
So they're not competing against academic grades and many extracurricular community service. So why pit yourself against yourself, right? So it's prudent to space it out in that manner.
It's funny because I don't encounter any students who object to the idea of preparing over the summer. I think most of the kind of students we're talking about who are academically ambitious, who burn the candle at both ends with as many extracurricular activities as possible. They've got work, they've got social lives. They appreciate being able to get all or most of their preparation in when school's out. And that's just that kind of scheduling that students at that level really need.
Right. And they don't always appreciate it at the outset, but at some point they appreciate it. So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
So obviously we can say like we all in agreement we think test scores matter and getting your best test score is important. But obviously we know what's different from our day is that students really do have a choice between the SAT and ACT now in a way they didn't before. I'm sort of curious, Eric, what are you thinking about? What are some of the do's and don'ts about trying to decide like is the SAT or the ACT better for a particular student?
Well, the first issue is to take a practice test very early, either end of ninth grade or beginning of 10th grade. And then the tests need to be looked at by professionals like us to help the student decide which test to take. It's not necessarily always going to be the higher score on the practice test. You have to think about the trajectory that's going to ensue with the tutoring. You also want to look at courses the student will take. But the big picture item is that in certain regions of the country, SAT is more familiar, certain regions, ACT is more familiar. But the reality is today, the colleges don't really differentiate between them. So we view it as ultimately a score driven issue, ultimately, which one test score or super score will end up giving them the most value.
What's interesting, I think, for us three is that when I think back to early in my career, we weren't advising. Like this was like they came to you, want that they needed or wanted the SAT or the ACT, one or the other. Now, like what you're bringing up, Eric, is why it's so important to work with a test prep professional because there are so many nuances here that will help us to give the best advisement, which hopefully makes the process more efficient and effective at the end of the day.
That's a great point, Amy. And another factor is we have noticed, my team and I at Greenberg Educational Group, that a lot of high schools have their pet favorites. So there's a lot of high schools that recommend the SAT more, the ACT more. So sometimes it's hard to unring that bell. So that's why starting early, having diagnostic testing as opposed to the whim of a particular high school is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's the standard in many states to have one favored exam. If it's the default is SAT, but there are a lot of ACT states where the schools use those tests as a state assessment, which means they're oriented all ACT all the time. And yet, to your point, Amy, experts can look at a PSAT and discern whether that student might be a better SAT or ACT test taker, and vice versa. You look at an ACT or a pre-ACT, we can tease the signal out of the noise and give good advice at the beginning, knowing that, of course, a student may project to be a strong ACT student, and then it looks like maybe the SAT turns out better, but we can get a faster jump on what's the more productive exam.
And I would add to that, if you get a high performing 10th grader with a PSAT score, you can introduce the idea like, are you interested in contending for national merit? Now, I know, Eric, you and Mike are in the state of New York where the index for that is high. Ohio, we're a little lower. But the point is, some families aren't even aware that if they come to me with wanting ACT, which is common in the state of Ohio, we may have to turn that around and say, no, wait, I see some numbers here that tell me that we want to start with PSAT, SAT. So sometimes, again, what parents come to thinking they're asking for, we may say, no, there's a different path or something different that you haven't even considered.
And the reality is, assuming a student has taken diagnostics within a relatively close time frame, maybe a month or two apart, then it's very, very valid. And in fact, we have a lot of students who come in with PSAT scores, and we don't have them do a full diagnostic SAT, but we have them do an ACT, and we can really compare
100%.
with our experience PSAT and ACT very pragmatically.
Okay, so I think we're agreed, right? Students, especially academically advanced students, should be considering testing on a much more accelerated timelines than perhaps their parents tested. Let's connect that piece to the bigger picture. We're testing because we want to show colleges what we're capable of. Tests are an important part of a selective college application. And again, we're talking about selective applications when we start getting into these timelines, because there are plenty of schools that have rolling admissions, open admit. They're taking students all the time right up to the first day and actually after the first day of classes. We're not worried about those schools. We're worried about the
They're
schools.
safe.
Yeah, that fill up really early. And I think the early decision, early action, I don't even know how to describe this confusion, but traditional early decision, early action has been chunked into all kinds of different variants. Eric, do you want to take a stab at explaining as simply as possible all the different early decision opportunities students may have?
Sure. Most families, when they come in, they use the words early decision or early action interchangeably, but there's a very, very big difference between them. So, early decision is a plan where a lot of students would need to apply by November 1st of their senior year, and they would be notified about 6 weeks later. A lot of schools also have early decision too, whereby they would apply typically beginning of January and find out mid-February. The issue that's very important to know, though, is that if a student gets in early decision, they must attend. Now, if they get in off a deferral or a wait list, then they're a free agent. They can do what they want. But the reality is, in exchange for a student committing themselves to going to a school, the colleges reward the student with increasing the likelihood of them getting in. So in many cases, the chances with early decision are 2 or 3 times greater. And what happens is many colleges now, as you both know, are filling half of the class with early decision.
Right.
The only caveat to that is there are a lot of colleges out there that if early decision is attained by a student and the school can't meet the financial aid of the student, in many cases they can walk away. But aside from that, really, it's
But
a
that's a
binding
slippery
agreement.
slope even, right? The idea is know
Yes,
whether you can pay
yes,
before you apply early
yes,
decision.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Also, you have to know that you're not going to be asking to appeal whatever aid they offer because you cannot appeal it.
right, right. But usually colleges tend to be fairly accommodating to that. I mean, there's such a glut of applications, just a torrent of applications that very often they look at that, through the lens of empathy in certain cases. Not every case, but in certain cases.
And that's really been the shift, I think, in our careers, probably. I feel like, well, remember, there was testing gaps, whether you go months, and there wasn't an SAT from June until you know, October or whatever, or an ACT from June until October. So now we do have more test dates and a little bit earlier, or more of them certainly right on application season. But the reality is, most students, when they arrive at the beginning of their senior year, these early decision dates mean testing in your senior year is, other than that first, September ACT or maybe that August now or September SAT, they really have to have their testing done almost really by summertime after their
I,
junior year.
I think the test makers now, it used to be that the October SAT was safe for early decision,
Yeah,
early action. But now ACT says that the October date, they're getting test scores back faster.
they're trying to
Historically,
compete,
trying to, but historically, the October test didn't work because
but
that
it
was
makes it
inflating
hard
date. But
because if you think you're going to apply early decision, any thought of that means you that window in the fall is not what parents might have thought it was, right?
Right. And also, that the score is going to be in many cases a deciding factor as to what school a student might apply early decision to. So having that information substantially in advance is a big asset.
Eric, can you clarify that statement?
Sure, sure, absolutely. So many of our students, by the time they get to the end of junior year, have a pretty good idea of whether they want to apply early decision or not. What happens, though, is it doesn't mean that they have to be 100% sure of where they're applying by the end of 11th grade. So typically, many of our students in the fall of 12th grade might be down to one or two schools, and they use various factors to help decide which one to apply to. Strategy is one component, test taking is another component, visiting schools is another. So the big picture item is it just complicates it. And in many cases, if the testing is done too late, it could cause a student to be unable, as a practical matter, to have it sensible for them to apply early decision.
Yeah, I think right, trying to earn your best score for a highly selective college application deep into the fall adds a lot of stress to the to the
Well,
entire
let me just tell
process.
you,
Correct.
the
Correct.
student stress moment, you guys, don't you feel more pressure in the fall if
Of
you know you're up
course,
against the gun
we
working with that
feel their
student?
timelines. We
We
want them
feel
to
it.
be
We
successful.
feel that timeline. So I know that's exactly how I approach, like we need to be done with this.
Right. And Amy, let's not forget the parents feel the timeline too. So it's
Or
a
they should.
collective that, well, many of them do. Many of them do. The other caveat I wanted to mention is that with early action, it helps admissions a little bit, but not nearly as much as early decision. So it's very important for students that we work with and that you guys work with know in advance the different benefits of each as well.
Yeah, and it depends school to school, right? Like, aren't there some selective schools that are taking maybe 80% of their income in class off of ED?
Yeah, especially schools that have ED1 and ED2.
Yeah.
So typically a lot of top tier schools will take about 50% ED1. But once you get through ED1 and ED2, then it could be, as you said, 75, 80%. The issue, though, is that there are not that many schools, relatively speaking, that have ED2, but it's becoming more popular as the years go by.
Yeah, Tulane had that stat a few years ago where like they took like it was like 100 kids in regular because they had taken
Yeah.
them all.
Right,
And that was
right.
insane to realize. And Tulane's a good school, but most families aren't even thinking about that at the same level of Ivies, and the highly selectives. But yeah, at schools you might not even expect there could be some real ramifications.
And Amy and Mike, a new reality, which was not foreseeable, is there are a lot of colleges that have early action and early decision.
Yes. Right.
And that's a new phenomenon. So that makes it even harder to discern what's what and who's who.
Well, that's the problem, right? We were talking, Amy, you mentioned how important getting professional advice from people in our industry is, and it's because college admissions policies are becoming more and more Byzantine. Your point about early decision, early action, that's one. Another is this idea that is the holdover from the pandemic is that there are still schools that are some shade of test optional. And that means that students might consider going into the early decision or early action pool without test scores. Have you found, Eric, that to be a successful play?
Well, it's a little bit of a tricky situation because what happens is that if we compare the college application admissions world right before COVID began to say now, the reality is most schools that are very selective, that really cared about the testing then, really cares about it now, at least as much, and in some cases, even more. So each year that goes by, test optionality has to be looked at much, much more closely and examined because it has different meaning at different colleges, and a student has to get the proper professional advice to assess that. The other thing also, which is very, very important, is because there's so much academic grade inflation out there at virtually every school, the reality is that makes the SAT, ACT even more valuable for a college to have. So when you look at that, that really also changes the paradigm that we're talking about.
Fantastic. Obviously, there's so much more that we could unpack. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
The best way would be to go to our website, Greenberg, Greenberg, educationalgroup.com, and you can email us through the website, and there's a lot of very informational, good content on the website as well.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next tests and the rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.